Hello everybody and welcome to Front Row Think Tank video number 2. Today we're doing the video a little bit differently. There's going to be a few more errors in this one. It's just going to be me reading off a script in front of me and talking directly to the camera, so we can do this in as few shots as possible. There'll probably be some background noise today. You can probably hear my brother, playing guitar, and you'll hear my dog and my family throughout the thing because, in a busy household of 7, you don't really get much quiet time to yourself, and we've got a busy weekend coming up, so we're trying to scrap this in and do this shoot in maximum 2 days. And yeah. And also in this video, it's just going to be more rugby focused, not any of my jokes, which, to be honest, are probably slightly below average in comedic value, and also because of the recent events with Pablo Matera. Yeah, you can get pulled up for saying anything. And of course, what he said was definitely not okay. But yeah, in an age of keyboard warriors, we'll stay on task and we'll talk about rugby, so how about that? Alright, so let's get stuck into it. So we're going to talk about this in a couple of phases, how it fell apart and what to next, what can the competition do next, or where to for the Southern Hemisphere rugby nations. Alright, let's get stuck in. Quick wardrobe change, because I didn't realise that until after I started the introduction that I hadn't been wearing my Melbourne Rebels top, which is what I wanted to wear for this video, so I had to quickly change that. So if you noticed that, then yeah. Anyway, the fall of Super Rugby. So I only started watching Super Rugby in 2017 and rugby as a whole. I've been playing for several years beforehand, but never really been into watching it. I usually just played sports and didn't watch them. But started watching, and I kind of noticed from the start that Super Rugby was never really a thing that was built to last. A couple of those reasons. One of them was differing time zones. It's hard for a person like me in Melbourne, or say someone in South Africa, to watch games halfway across the globe. So say if I wanted to watch, I remember watching an embarrassing Melbourne Rebels loss to the Lions. I got up super early for this game. Melbourne Rebels fans will know what I'm talking about, where we were up by like 30 points or something. It might not have been that much. We were up by a nice margin at half time, and then they came back and scored obviously more points than us and won the game. And I got up. I didn't even get up. I just didn't go to sleep, and game was at like 2 a.m. or something here, and it was just a waste of my time. Not just the loss didn't make it any easier to deal with, but getting up that early is not fun. And I'm not a person who likes to record the games and watch them later. So when I have my phone with me, I can just search up the scores, and it's just too boring for me. Yeah, and look, and with one of the biggest appeals for Super Rugby being that it was so many different nations in so many different continents, is that one of its key attracting factors, that it was a team from Dunedin, New Zealand versus the Cape Town Stormers, just wasn't that interesting anymore. People started to lose interest because proper rivalries couldn't be formed, and at the end of the day, the round robin style competitions that were before rugby reached its peak, Super Rugby reached its peak, didn't allow for teams halfway across the world to play each other that regularly, and then the conference system made it virtually impossible to get any repetitive fixtures of say Auckland playing against Durban each year, because it would just be rotated through the away games that weren't being played a part of the conference, weren't being a part of the South African or the New Zealand conference. Each year they'd be rotated so that everyone got to play each other more frequently, but it never really worked out. So that was always a problem, and people just didn't care afterwards, because rivalries just, you'd only watch your home derbies. You watch New South Wales Waratahs versus the Rebels, and that would be the most exciting game of the year, because no one cares when the Rebels go to play, the Jaguares. It's just not that interesting anymore. Yeah. Money's also a huge factor. You know, so the Northern Hemisphere nations have got a lot of money. Top 14 is just cash cows and everything. Which is the French league for those who don't know. Crowd numbers, that's a big problem. You know, you've got let's look at this. Super Rugby's always been criticised for having dwindling crowds everywhere except for New Zealand, and well, this year in 2020, watching Stormers games was awesome because the stadium over there was packed. I mean, fans just wanted to watch after, South Africa won the World Cup, and they're probably, South Africa went a little bit overboard by saying, oh, they're the best supporters in Super Rugby, or the best would probably be New Zealand because they're the most consistently at the games. But they were certainly the best in South Africa, those supporters, so hats off to them. But anyway, if we're talking about stadium size, because most stadiums weren't filled and there's always jokes flying around like, oh, it's unfair for, the Lions to go and play the Bulls in front of an empty stadium because of COVID, because the Bulls are already used to that. Rugby fans should get that joke. Anyway, Sky Stadium in Wellington can hold 35,000 people. ANZ Stadium can hold 83,000. Ellis Park in Joburg can hold 60,000. The Jaguares home stadium is just shy of 50,000. And the Sunwolves, who in Tokyo had a stadium that could hold 27,000. And so we're looking at like nations in the teams in the Pro 14, such as Benetton, the biggest team in Italy, has 6,700 seated stadium. Then Edinburgh, its new stadium is 11,000, and yes, whilst they do play games at Murrayfield at the moment, whenever it's not against Glasgow, it's never that full. It's exactly like Super Rugby teams. And then when it is against Glasgow, which is the only two Scotland teams in the Pro 14, it's only 3/4 the way full. So it's nothing fantastically impressive about that. The Scarlets' home ground is 15,000, and Munster, who have probably one of the biggest stadiums in Ireland, is 18,000. And, again, rare to see those stadiums filled. I mean, I know that Wales has a big problem with people coming to watch anything besides the actual Welsh Dragons play. Ospreys are always struggling for numbers at their stadiums. So, smaller stadiums obviously makes for a hell of a lot more of an atmosphere to watch games. I mean, I know it's much more fun to watch online when a stadium is filled with people compared to watching games, in Super Rugby where there's just no one there. And you can, hear the players and everything, and because there's no crowd atmosphere at all. Yeah. Another big reason for the fall of Super Rugby, I believe, is how the Sunwolves were dealt with. Like the Jaguares, Argentina and Japan have both been knocking on Tier 1 nations' doors for quite some time and have been looking to be included in domestic competitions. So when both of them got their own teams, the Jaguares for Argentina and the Sunwolves for Japan, Jaguares got better progressively every year. They always were improving, their stats were getting better until last year they made it all the way to the grand final. They were one of the most dominant teams, and if Super Rugby stayed for just a couple more years, I reckon 1 or 2 more years in its current format, they would have won the title, and they would have become the team to beat because they were stacked with international players. Because they said, we'll only select players who play in Argentina. I think at one stage the Waratahs and the Jaguares played each other, and they had 1,000 international caps on the bench. So that's games played for Argentina, totaling 8 players, 1,000 caps between them who are just sitting on the bench, who aren't even playing the full game. The Sunwolves were handled pretty poorly. The Japan's Rugby Football Union and the top league, which is the top league in Japan, those domestic teams held on to their best players and didn't want them really going to play for the Sunwolves. Whereas a few like token players like Shota Hori, sorry if I butcher these names, Michael Leach, and a couple of other names who I feel really bad for not knowing, but I know their faces. Were released, but many others weren't. Also, it was said that Sanzar was making Japan pay much more than any other nation to compete in Super Rugby annually. And also, apparently, I remember there was a whole saga about this where the South African part of Sanzar was pushing to get rid of Japan because it was too much of a burden for South African teams to travel all the way to Japan. Again, time zone thing, so it's money issues, it's player welfare issues, it's a whole bunch of things, but apparently the rumours going around was that South Africa wasn't happy and South Africa was trying to fade them out, and they eventually got kicked out. This was their last year playing in Super Rugby, and now they're gone, and hopefully we see them again. I really like to. I think it's fair to say that the Sunwolves was everyone's second favourite team besides their own nations. So, where to now for Super Rugby? Well, as I see it, Super Rugby, as its current form as of 2020, is dead. It's no longer, I don't think they should even consider going back to that. It wasn't working out, everything was going against it, so I think it's time for a fresh start. However, Super Rugby doesn't have to die off completely. Super Rugby could kind of morph and change into more of a Heineken Championship Cup. So, where the best teams in Europe play each other to be nominated the best team in the Northern Hemisphere. Super Rugby could become who is the best team in the Southern Hemisphere, whilst then you have Super Rugby AU, so that's just the Australian teams playing against each other in a normal domestic competition, but then, once or twice a week we'll go off and play teams in South Africa or in New Zealand or something. Same with Super Rugby Aotearoa, sorry if I butchered that, and Super Rugby Unlocked, or if, South Africa decides to go play in the Pro 14, they're not allowed to play in the European Cup because obviously they're not a part of the Northern Hemisphere. So, whilst the Northern Hemisphere teams are, vying for the top spot in rugby up there, why doesn't South Africa just come play here during that time? And, that way then we could incorporate the new SLAR, which is the South American's new domestic competition, so Jaguares still have somewhere to go and can still stay in the comp and, play against the best teams and that's a way that they can play against the best teams in New Zealand, Australia and South Africa. Japan can they can either keep the Sunwolves and put them into Global Rapid Rugby, or they could just have their best teams in their top league play against our best teams and see what happens there. That's where I believe is the next step. And what are some of the key lessons we can learn from Super Rugby? It's obvious to me that a competition played across multiple nations can work. Celtic nations work fine. Pro 14 is one of the best, if not the top 3 best in Europe, if not the world. Best competition. I can see that working very well for many other nations, such as Tier 2 European nations and developing African nations, who have been struggling for position on the world stage. They just need a domestic comp that has a little bit more flair to it, is playing against higher caliber oppositions and brings more excitement to fans and stuff to watch. And if it's in a controlled area, such as similar time zones, that's a massive tick in their favour.